Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of Dacorum Borough Council's Development Management Committee. My name is Councillor Jankowski and I'm the chair of the committee. Those more eagle-eyed may be thinking Councillor Stevens looks different. He is of course now Mayor of Dacorum, but has left some sizable shoes as former chair of the committee, which I will endeavour to fill. The vice chair of the committee is Councillor Guest. Other members of the committee in attendance at the meeting are Councillors Bromham, Hobson, Madden, Patterson, Riddick, Smith-Wright, Symington and Williams. There are a number of council officers in attendance, and these are Head of Development Management, Philip Stanley, Case Officers Heather Eadie, Martin Stickley, Elspeth Palmer, Joan Reid, Legal Officer Lillian Odugu, and Corporate Democratic Support Officer Kaylee Johnston. We are not expecting a fire drill this evening, but if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the ground floor and assemble outside. If the meeting is likely to be extended, there may be a comfort break during the meeting around 9 p.m. Before we start, please mute or turn off your mobile phones. The first item on the agenda this evening is to approve the minutes of the last meeting of the committee held on Thursday, the 16th of April. The minutes have been circulated previously. Are these minutes agreed? Those minutes are approved, and I will sign the hard copies of the minutes later. The next item on the agenda is to receive any apologies for absence. Are there any apologies and substitute members to be noted? Councillor Guest.
Councillor Davant gives his apologies.
Are there any other apologies? We've received apologies from Councillor Hemel as well. The next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Please can I remind members to declare any disposable, pecuniary or other interests at the beginning of the relevant planning application. Any member who declares an interest will be allowed to stay in the meeting or will not have the right to vote. I will also remind members that only those present during the entire debate for an item are permitted to vote on that item. Next item on the agenda is public participation. I would like to remind members and the public about the rules regarding public participation. We have a number of members of the public who have registered to speak, and the list has been circulated. Our normal practice is to bring forward applications where a speaker is present. You'll be invited to address the meeting when the item you have registered to speak on is to be discussed. The normal procedure and rules in respective times to speak will apply. Time per speaker is 3 minutes. The ward councillors will be entitled to their own 5 minutes to speak. Speakers in objection to officer recommendation are taken first. The time will be displayed on the screen and times will be strictly enforced. Members of the public will not be entitled to take part in the discussion that follows public speakers. Any other persons who are viewing or listening to the meeting are welcome to do so, but they are not entitled to take any active part in the meeting, and microphones and cameras should remain turned off at all times. I have the discretion to remove any member of the public from the meeting if they interrupt, try to engage in the discussion, or are abusive. For each application, the officer will present the report to the committee, then those who have registered to speak will be called to speak. Following this, questions will be taken from the committee along with statements and comments for debate. There will be a vote among councillors which will represent the decision of this committee. The first planning application on the agenda is item 5A, and this is for the construction of 6 columns and 8 luminaires to floodlight the existing football pitch at Bovingdon Football Clubhouse in Bovingdon. Do any members wish to declare an interest on this item? Registered to speak on this item are David Howes, Dawn Ward, Councillor Philip Walker and Neil Boddington. I will now ask the case officer, in which case this is Heather Ely, to present their report. Thank you. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Chair. So before starting the presentation, I just want to draw members' attention to the addendum, which confirms that condition 10 is no longer required following comments that have been received from the Ministry of Defence and the Met Office. So the recommendation to grant is now made on the basis that that condition would be removed. It's also recommended that the wording of condition 3 be amended. As it stands, this condition restricts the use of floodlight and columns to 10 occasions a year between the hours of 7 and 10:30 p.m. And it's recommended that this condition be reworded to also require the football club to maintain a log of usage that can be reviewed by the local planning authority upon request. Start the presentation. Next slide, please. So the site comprises a football pitch, which is situated off Green Lane in Bovingdon in the Green Belt, and it forms part of the Bovingdon Football Club. So permission is sought for the installation of 6 15-metre high floodlighting columns, 2 of which would be telescopic, with associated luminaires and shields. And as previously mentioned, the columns would be used on 10 occasions a year between the hours of 7 and 10:30, and this would be secured by way of condition. So the application is presented at committee, as it is the opinion of the Head of Development Management. The application is of significant public interest. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows the horizontal light spill plan. So you can see the red triangles, which indicate the location of the 6 new floodlighting columns. It's worth noting the 2 at the top of the football pitch would be telescopic, which means they'd be retracted after use. So the main concern that's been raised relates to the potential impact of the columns on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties along Greenview Close. So the location of these properties along Greenview Close is shown by the green stars, which is at the top of the slide. So you can see the blue contour lines that surround the football pitch show that light would predominantly fall on the pitch. And whilst you can see that the lines do reach the rear gardens of properties 10 and 11 Greenview Close, this would be at a very low level, so it's not considered to be harmful. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the vertical light spill plan, and it shows the potential impact of light that's directed upwards. So whilst this plan indicates that properties 10 and 11 Greenview Close would experience lighting levels which would exceed 5 lux, which is the standard lighting level deemed acceptable, this would be mitigated by way of shields that would be installed to the floodlighting columns, and this would help to mitigate glare, directing light towards the pitch and away from these residential properties. And it is also worth noting that this plan shows the absolute worst case scenario, so it does not account for intervening vegetation and boundary treatments between the football pitch and the residential properties, which would help to reduce further light spill. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are just site photos. So the first 2 images just show properties 9, 10 and 11 Greenview Close, and you can see the boundary treatment that runs between the football pitch and these properties. Next slide, please. These photos show views to the north. So in the first image, you're looking towards the top end of the pitch, towards the access. The second and third images, you can see the football pitch and glimpses of the clubhouse and the stand. It's worth noting the corner of the pitch, which you can see in the second and third images, is the approximate location of one of the floodlighting columns that would be installed. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows views to the east. So you probably can't see it very clearly in these plans, but it does show the halfway line of the pitch, and that's the location where further floodlighting columns would be installed. Next slide, please. So this image just shows views of the western edge of the football pitch, and in the third image you've got the corner of the pitch. That would be the approximate location of one of the floodlighting columns. Next slide, please. So then we've just got some further views of the residential properties along Greenview Close, which you can see in the background of all of these images. Next slide, please. and then further views, but these are just longer distances taken from the end of the football pitch, again looking towards those residential properties along Greenview Close. Next slide, please. So there was a previous scheme for floodlighting on the site that was refused back in 1993, but that scheme is materially different to the current scheme, and it is acknowledged that technology and planning policy has progressed significantly since that application was considered. Whilst it is acknowledged that there would be some harm to the residential amenity of properties 10 and 11 Greenview Close, it's felt that this harm would largely be mitigated by way of the shields that would be installed to the floodlighting columns. The use of the floodlighting columns would also be infrequent. It would be restricted to 10 occasions a year, and this would be secured by way of planning condition. So overall, it's felt the limited harm of the development on residential amenity grounds is outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme, and it's recommended that the application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I will now invite speakers to address the meeting. Speaking in objection, I have David Howells and Dawn Ward. You have a joint 5 minutes with neither one of you permitted to speak for more than 3 minutes individually. You can now speak. Please use your microphone. Your 3 minutes or joint 5 minutes will begin when you start speaking. You'll be stopped if you overrun time.
Thank you. Dear members of the Planning Committee, my name is Dawn Ward. I live in Greenview Close, and this is David Howells, our planning consultant. And we thank you for allowing us to speak here tonight on behalf of residents both in Greenview Close and Green Lane. While we are not adverse to the football club seeking to provide improvements to the facilities, we are, however, concerned about the impact the proposed floodlights will have on our amenities and the local area. The ability to allow for games to take place in the evenings will have a knock-on effect in terms of parking around the grounds in the evenings, something not currently experienced by residents as there is no evening matches that take place. The officer contradicts what the agent completed in the application form by stating that there are around 30 parking spaces within the site. The agent said that there was none. Any parking spaces within the site are only likely to be used by players and staff, not by fans, so there will be an increase in the number of cars to Bovingdon through the introduction of evening games, therefore causing a detrimental effect on parking within the village and, most importantly, the neighbouring roads. Further, the site has lost its overflow car park that was located between the pitch and the gardens of Greenview Close, as this has been replaced with an unlawfully constructed AstroTurf pitch. The club tried to suggest that this would be used as a playground, but it appears to be used for junior training and holiday clubs. Prior to its unlawful installation, the club removed established natural screening. This took away some protection from noise and light pollution, leaving now very little. There is a real concern that the floodlights could be used on the AstroTurf pitch for additional use in the evenings. I shall now pass over to David.
Good evening. The distances the officer refers to of the properties being at least 24 metres from the site is incorrect. The gardens immediately abut the site and are no more than 10 metres from the pitch and nearest floodlight, whilst the dwellings are as close as 20 metres to the pitch and floodlights. It is acknowledged that there are no set levels by the government for light to be considered a statutory nuisance, mainly because each impact is assessed on its own merits. However, the introduction of floodlights in this constrained environment, however modern and technically advanced they are, as no system is perfect in preventing light spill, will create light spill, and that will extend into the gardens of the properties, that back onto the ground, and will have a damaging effect on their amenities and also ecology and biodiversity, of which several trees, shrubs and hedges were removed prior to this application being submitted. The council talk about a maximum figure of 5 lux as being acceptable to the neighbours, but the details provided show from the plans listed in the conditions that on the boundary of the residential gardens, the lux readings are up to 34 lux in places, whilst it is still in double figures going into the gardens from the vertical spill, greater than in some parts of the pitch. From the horizontal spill, it shows figures of around 25 lux on the boundary and still in double figures into the gardens. This will have an adverse impact on the residents and local wildlife often found in the gardens late in the evenings. Consequently, it's felt that the position of the floodlights, the mitigation suggested, and the overall impact on the neighbouring properties and their amenities is not acceptable and has not been thought out clearly in light of the constraints the site faces. The conditions listed contradict the consultation responses provided, particularly the hours of use, which the ecology officer gives a clear cut-off time of 10 p.m. If left at being switched off by 10:30, this together with the extended time to allow for the attraction of the lights would result in there being disturbances up until 11:30 or later in reality. This again has a further impact on the amenities and residents adjoining the site. If it is decided that the application should be granted permission tonight, then it is requested that members review the conditions in more detail, and in particular conditions 2, 3 and 5, and consider including wording relating to the team this application is for, which is the Bovingdon men's first team, and have the conditions state that it should be for Bovingdon men's first team match days only, no other game time to be included or training sessions. However, on the basis of these concerns, which the residents do not believe to have been addressed sufficiently in the submission documents, it is therefore requested the officer's recommendation is overturned by members of the committee and the application be refused. And it's important to remember that a refusal will not prevent the club from being able to play football in its current format, as they currently play without floodlights. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you for keeping to time. I'll now move on to Councillor Philip Walker as our next speaker. Councillor Walker, I don't need to tell you how this works, but when you have 5 minutes, when your time starts, you start speaking.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, officers and fellow councillors. As I'm sure you're aware, I'm one of the ward councillors for Bovingdon and also a parish councillor for Bovingdon. You'll be pleased to hear that I'm not going to speak for 5 minutes on this subject. I think some of us were here a few weeks ago where we just about lost the will to live. But I just wanted to put a few points forward in support of this application. We are considering tonight the installation of 6 lighting columns, of which 2 are retractable. The retractable posts cost considerably more and have been offered by the club in order, when not in use, they will be lowered and therefore not be visible by the residents in Greenview Close. Please remember that this is to be used for 10 times a year. It's not weekly, it's not monthly, it's 10 times a year. The lights are extremely important to the club in order they can progress within the Football Association. If they can't, the knock-on effect is that they will lose young talented players who will simply move to other clubs which will not be local, involve travel and be a loss to the local club and the village. We all hear how we need to provide leisure and sports facilities for youngsters. Isn't this a prime example of this? Bovingdon is going through considerable changes anyway, with more and more housing coming, which will obviously lead on to more and more youngsters wanting to enjoy sport. To conclude, these lights are to be used again a minimum of 10, for maximum of 10 times a year. Therefore, can I please ask you to support the officer's recommendation in granting this planning application? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Next up on the those registered to speak, I have Neil Boddington. Neil, you have 3 minutes when you start speaking.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Neil Boddington. I'm a specialist sports planner. I've got over 200 pitches behind me, so I'm pretty experienced in designing pitches and floodlighting. As ever, we have carefully considered and designed the scheme to not adversely affect residents. We had a public meeting, but unfortunately only 3 local people attended, but we released plans to the local webpage. We've worked with your officers for the best part of nine months now, adding and changing different bits of lighting information to ensure that both sides knew exactly where they were to the satisfaction of your officers. And the club volunteered themselves to put in the retractable lights at their own expense in order to seek to overcome the objections of the parish council, which they were successful in so doing. So I think it can be said that we've worked diligently to come to a satisfactory conclusion. The proposal will allow the club to go from strength to strength and to keep its local players who have grown up through the junior ranks, as opposed to losing them if the club cannot get promoted. We commend the officer's report to you, which is detailed and comprehensive, so no need for me to carry on. In respect to some of the comments, we don't think parking is an issue. I think that's both sides consider that on days when the floodlighting will be used. We accept that sometimes there are issues with parking, but there is enough parking on site for the single match that can take place when the pitch is being floodlit. And so in respect of the consideration of the floodlighting element, parking has been deemed to be satisfactory. We carried out a preliminary ecological assessment, as we do with all planning applications, especially with floodlighting, and no issue was identified in respect of any of the vegetation surrounding the site. The lighting accords with the Institute of Lighting Professionals guidelines, and that takes measurements of light at the windows of the properties, not what falls in the garden. The retraction, contrary to the suggestion that's just been made of the floodlights, takes about 4 minutes. It's air compressed, and basically you pull the plug out and it goes down. So the deadline of the end of the match, effectively, we would undertake to immediately lower the lights, and the lights would be turned off before the retraction takes place for safety purposes. So the 11:30 that's just been given to you is something expected.
That's your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to debate. Are there any members who wish to speak or ask a question? No? No? Councillor Bromham.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I had some background in lighting systems. So the lights falling on the actual properties around the windows, I think were simulated to be about 3 or 4 lux, and which is just a bit below the I think what is the accepted limit of about 5 lux. So that should be easy to achieve with modern LEDs, which should be much better performing in terms of the light, the way that the light is distributed compared to, I think there was a planning application a couple of decades ago where that would have been incandescent lights or something like that, which would have been much harder to control. So on this simulation of the lighting intensities on the houses, my first question is, were the light shields included in that simulation? Because if not, I would expect those numbers to be significantly lower when the light shields are fitted. My second question is about the colour of the light and the surrounding biodiversity and welfare of the residents is very important. And I note that the colour of the light is 5,000 Kelvin, which is quite a cold light. That means it's got a lot of blue in it. Blue is particularly affects the circadian rhythm of both people, but if it's shining in through their windows, and is more disruptive to wildlife. And it's probably not part of the regulation, but I'm just wondering whether that is a consideration and whether it would be possible to, I know there's a trend towards using longer wavelengths and less blue content for those reasons, and I wondered if that had been considered at all.
Thank you, Councillor Bromham. Heather, do you have a response?
So for the first question, my understanding is the simulations were without the shields. So the situation would improve once the shields have been installed. And as I mentioned in the presentation, it also doesn't account for the intervening vegetation and boundary treatment. So that would also reduce those levels. With respect to the colour of the lights, it's not something that I have a lot of detailed knowledge on. What I can confirm is that a preliminary ecological appraisal was carried out and was reviewed by the ecology team, and they're satisfied with mitigation that's set out in that document that there wouldn't be any adverse impacts on protected species. So from my standpoint, I'm satisfied that there's no harm in that area.
Thank you, Heather. Councillor Bromham, did you have a follow-up? Perfect. Councillor Smith-Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm following on from Councillor Bromham. I also would be concerned of the quality of light and the disturbance to wildlife. So I would like a kind of more detailed response as to what the bulbs you are using, and because I think there is a definite disturbance in different types of light to wildlife. So I wondered if you could drill down a bit more and give back a more informed response. That was my first question. The second one is, in that the football club has managed without these lights for many years, what's going to change with the lights? How is it going to improve their life, having lights?
Thank you, Councillor Smith-Wright. Heather?
Yeah, so with respect to why the floodlights are required, it's so the senior team can progress up to the next league. So my understanding is that they're currently at the top of the league and the FA require floodlights for them to be able to progress. So that's why they're required. In terms of the lighting details, so we have got specification details for the luminaires and the shields, which have been submitted. In terms of specific lighting comments on the ecology side of things with respect to the specifications, I'm not really able to provide any more information on that.
I mean, other than the ecologist has raised no objection to the details provided and has not asked for further information, and reminding members, of course, that the application is, well, that the condition limits it for 10 occasions per year.
Thank you, Beth. Councillor Smith-Wright, do you have a...
Yes, I think, thank you for that response. I think for 10 occasions a year, and it is going to significantly improve the club's performance, and I think we're all for encouraging access to that kind of improved facility. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that answer.
Thank you, Councillor Smith-Wright. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to note that I'm assuming that these 10 occasions would be in the diary quite early on, the matches, so the residents would be able to plan it around that. At least they'd be alerted of it and it wouldn't be a nasty surprise. And just a second point, I'm having trouble connecting on all of my devices, so I can't check this, but I don't suppose you know off the top of your head whether support of the football at this club and generally in decorum is part of the sports strategy that was released a few years ago. But just a reminder that it is something that I believe the council has agreed to support local clubs. So I just wanted to note that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hobson. Heather?
Yeah, I can come back on the first point. So condition 3 secures the 10 occasions a year. So it's between the 1st of November and the 31st of March. But yeah, so we've got those timings in there, so we know when the floodlights would be used. And I did obviously mention that we would request that the football club detail their usage so that we can ensure that they're only being used the 10 times a year. I'm not really sure on the second point. Sports strategy.
I think it was just a comment. I don't think it needs a response.
Thank you, Councillor Hobson. Councillor Madden.
Thank you. I would just like to bring up the fact that we had a similar situation a few years ago with Camelot Rugby Club when they wanted to have floodlights installed on one of their pitches. And it made a big difference to the club, and for that and all the other reasons that I've listened to this evening, I'd like to propose officer recommendation.
Thank you. We'll park that at the moment. Councillor Symington.
Thank you. I just put my hand up to say that I opened the planning application, and if you look on that, there are details about the lamps. I'm not a lamp expert, but the picture says it's got full shields. The lamps are Silico LED 500K CRI 70. I'm afraid this means nothing to me, but I believe that it is specified in the planning application what they will be. And there's more details which I obviously won't read out, but as I said, it is in the documents on the planning application. My own view, and I'm happy to support Councillor Madden, is that the benefits to the club and the importance of making sport available to everyone in the community outweigh the harm, the limited harm and the mitigated harm. And I appreciate that the parish council have already extracted some concessions, or certainly a significant concession in terms of having retractable lamps. And therefore, as I said, I'm happy to second Councillor Madden's proposal. But I can see other people want to speak, so
Thank you.
I'll let you be the judge of that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Symington. Councillor Bromham.
Yeah, briefly, since we're talking about the technical aspects of the lamps again, the colour rendering index of 70% is not particularly good. I doubt it's a regulatory requirement, because it usually isn't, but it probably ought to be. And even though a higher CRI will have slightly lower energy efficiency, probably, it will give a less harsh light, both for the players and people in the neighbourhood.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
I've only got one minor concern, I think, otherwise I'm going to support the application, in that people will come to see these matches and they'll park at the football grounds car park, which I think is not particularly well lit. So I was wondering if the floodlights would stay on beyond the end of the match until everybody has left the car park. So if we could have a slight variation in that. Also, it's possible that there might be a need for one or two additional matches with floodlights over and above the 10 if Bovingdon has a good cup run or something like that. So I wondered if we can be a bit flexible about the exact number, subject to each one being agreed by the council.
Heather, did you want to come back on those two questions? Councillor Patterson.
So if additional lighting was required, it would need a future application for us to look at that. We've obviously tried to make sure that the development isn't harmful to those residential properties. So at the moment, the light spill is predominantly on the pitch and wouldn't extend to the car park. But if that was required, that was something that we could consider under a later planning application.
Okay.
And just to respond to the leaving the car park point, I think that's the reason why it's a 10:30 cut-off as opposed to the 10 o'clock cut-off that was mentioned by the public speakers, to give that time after the match. Typically 7:45 kick-off, 9:45 finish, so it's that additional time for people to leave.
Thank you. Are there any other members that wish to speak? Or I have a proposer for officer recommendation in Councillor Madden. And just as a reminder, officer recommendation is that planning permission be granted, subject to conditions set out under section 11 of the report. Councillor Madden proposing, and Councillor Symington as seconder. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour of officer recommendation? Is unanimous. Thank you. The result of that vote is, unanimous, as I said. Thank you. Officer recommendation is therefore carried. Members of the public in attendance for item 5A in the gallery, more than welcome to leave at this point. Thank you. The next item, planning application on the agenda, is item 5B, which is for change of use of equestrian building to 3-bedroom dwelling, self-build and removal of associated equestrian storage at 5 Acres Farm, Frithsden. Do any of the members wish to declare an interest on this item? Registered to speak on this item, I have Parish Councillor Eamon Brennan and Alison McDougall from the Neighbourhood Society. I will now invite the speakers to address the meeting. Ah, yes, apologies. First time you can tell. Yeah, I will now hand over to the case officer, who in this case is Martin Stickley, to present the application.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. This application relates to a site called 5 Acres Farm in Frithsden on the southeastern side of Nettleden Road, just south of the Alford Arms, which you can see in that picture on the right-hand side. It's approximately 14 minutes walk along a bridleway and footpath to the centre of Potton End. Next slide, please. This is the access onto Nettleden Roads. There's currently high fencing that screens the site, and there are hedgerows either side. And you can see the former agricultural, now equestrian building in the distance. Next slide, please. So just taking a look at the highways implications and the access point, these are the visibility splays from the access point as you come onto the road. The right one's looking left and the left one's looking right. Not so helpful putting them that way around, apologies for that, but there's been no objections from the highways department, considering that there's just one dwelling that's proposed versus the existing equestrian facility on the site. Next slide, please. So here's the equestrian building. As you can see, it was formerly a barn, and since then there's been subdivision and stabling put inside it. Next slide, please. And just moving further north in the site, you can see some of the other paraphernalia associated with the equestrian facility there. Next slide, please. So the proposal requires the removal of all of the ancillary buildings, and there's a condition requiring the removal of the paraphernalia and other parts on the site as well. But as you can see in this photograph, this is some of the buildings near the front of the site that would be removed via that condition if permission is approved. Next slide, please. This is the adjacent bridleway. The site's quite visible at the moment at certain locations. Officers are proposing conditions to remove permitted development rights for boundary treatment, so there would be hedgerows required. The application site is within the Chilterns National Landscape, and therefore there is a LVA, Landscape Visual Appraisal, that's been submitted that requires a comprehensive planting strategy, which I'll show in a later slide. Next slide, please. This is the existing building. So the form of the building wouldn't change. It would be more to do with the cladding that goes on there. But as you can see, the building on the right-hand side, the big rectangular building to the north would be the one that stays, and the 3 buildings to the south are the ones that would be removed. Next slide, please. These are the proposed elevations. So we are within proximity to the Ashridge Registered Park and Garden. So we had some input from the Conservation and Design team to work on the design. They suggested retaining the brick piers and providing wooden cladding and retaining the tiling and the chimney. So those elements were introduced and no harm was identified by the Conservation and Design team. And the design reflects the rural character of the area as well. Next slide, please. Proposed sections of floor plans shows you that there's 3 bedrooms being introduced. The openings have been kept quite small to represent the like a barn conversion and to reduce light spill into the rural area. Next slide, please. So this is the landscape and visual impact assessment with the planting proposals. It's worth pointing out that as I pointed out in my report, that there have been historic appeals on this site, one in 2004 one in 2014. The latest one in 2014 included greenbelt, landscape and bat survey reasons for refusal. The LVA, as produced here, is one of the bits of information that was sent in to kind of combat the reasons in the appeal, and so was the bat survey. But it's also worth pointing out that the MPPF and the policy context has changed since 2014. The previously developed land policy requirement that requires no greater impact to the green belt has changed to no substantial impact. And based on the removal of the buildings at the front of the site, there would be a lesser spatial impact and, in my view, a lesser visual impact as well. In combination with the planting proposals that would be secured for 15 years or replanting within 15 years to make sure that that mature vegetation comes to life, I believe that harm is reduced and the issues raised by the inspectors have been overcome. Next slide, please. So just a couple of last slides showing the ecology as is, and next slide, please, with the removal of some of that hard-standing other paraphernalia. The application is for a self-build plot, and that would be tied into the legal agreement that would also tie in the Chilterns Beechwoods mitigation should planning permission be approved. So officer's recommendation is for approval, subject to a number of conditions and a legal agreement to be capturing those mitigation measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I will now invite members of the public to speak. Parish Councillor Eamon Brennan, you have 3 minutes when you start speaking.
Good evening, my name is Abe.
Get the timer up. The microphone's working at least.
Good evening, my name is Eamon Brennan, Nettleden Parish Council. We note this is substantially the same application that was submitted in 2004 and 2014, both of which were refused and subsequent appeals were dismissed. This site is an agricultural barn in active equestrian use, in open rural greenbelt land within the national landscape. It is not, in our view, grey belt. It's not a brownfield site. It's not degraded. This rural country setting retains the openness and character of the greenbelt, which was designed to preserve, which the two planning inspectors decided that a conversion to a luxury house would harm. It's not a developed site, in our view. To reclassify the site as grey belt is to misapply a concept which our current Prime Minister described as intending to apply to disused petrol stations, abandoned car parks. Some might argue the grey belt policy is being used as a loophole to build on premium green belt land. That is, developers targeting good quality countryside and productive agricultural land that was previously protected, rather than the disused brownfield sites the public was led to expect. Contrary to the planning officer's report, footnote 7 is brought into play because of the land's designation as national landscape and greenbelt. Those protections remain despite changes in policy context over the year. There has to be protections in place, clearly. I urge committee members to take note of these protections fully in this case. Development must be in a sustainable location. Well, it's borderline sustainability, says the report. But really, it's quite isolated. There's not even a footpath, there's no public transport, and you need a car to get around. It's at the apex of a hill where there's now chevrons as a result of a recent significant car accident. There's no demonstrable unmet need for this type of development. It doesn't meet a housing shortage. This property would target a high-income commuter or retiree, rather than providing essential needs of low-cost housing for local workers. It's substantially more isolated than that of a local village. So the Parish Council urged committee members to follow the decision of the two previous appeal inspectors and reject this application for the same reason. The reuse as a new luxury house would result in significant substantial harm to the openness of the green belt. Once that land is gone, it's gone forever. Therefore, the application should be refused.
Thank you, Eamon, and thank you for keeping to time. Next speaking in objection from the Neighbourhood Society. Alison, do you want to check your microphone's working? And your 3 minutes starts when you start speaking.
Good evening, councillors. I speak for the members of the Nettleden, Frithsden and District Society who object to this application. This case is a vitally important precedent in this sensitive area of Greenbelt and Chilterns National Landscape. How you decide it and whether or not this site is Greybelt will be quoted back at the council in future planning applications for development of sites all along the Nettleden Road in this area. This includes the 10 acres of land immediately adjacent to this site, put up for sale 2 days before the last DMC at which this application was originally scheduled to be heard, when the planning officer's recommendation that this site should be characterised as Greybelt was publicly known. You have an opportunity here to give a strong message that due to the Chilterns National Landscape designation, the footnote 7 protections in the MPPF apply to restrict development and the test for Greybelt is not met. This is a unique case because the significance of the National Landscape designation on this site has already been tested twice in appeals against council refusal of the very same set of plans for conversion of a barn to a dwelling as are before you today. In both 2004 and 2014, the appeal inspector dismissed the appeal and found the development would cause significant unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of this high-quality landscape. We do not understand how the planning officer can now go behind these decisions and find otherwise. Whilst it is true that the MPPF has changed regarding Greenbelt, the legal requirement to conserve and protect the AONB, or National Landscape as it is now called, has actually been strengthened in legal terms since 2014. The planning officer is relying on screening measures to mitigate the harm to the national landscape confirmed by the planning appeal decisions. It is settled law that the principle of landscaping or screening cannot be used as a mitigation measure to turn a proposal which fundamentally causes harm into something which is acceptable. We urge councillors to follow the reasoning of 2 previous planning appeal inspectors and Decorum's previous refusals and refuse this exact same scheme on the basis that, firstly, footnote 7 applies due to the Chilterns National Landscape designation and the previous planning inspector's findings on significant harm to the national landscape on the same scheme. 2, it is not in a sustainable location. And 3, it breaches one of the fundamental Greenbelt purposes, which is to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Members will now move to questions and debate. Are there any members who wish to speak or ask a question? Councillor Smith, right.
I'd just like to say that
Bear with
I
me.
am...
Sorry, Councillor Smith. Alison, your microphone is still on. Thank you. Councillor Smith, right, sorry.
I'm the county councillor for Bridgewater, which is takes in Nettleden and Potton End. So I'd just like to make that point, but I'm prepared to view this with an open mind.
Okay, thank you. Any other members that wish to ask any questions or speak? Councillor Bromham?
So this application does, although it seems like quite a pleasant development, there'll be more green space, and it's removing some of those buildings which probably did look quite messy. It does represent a net loss of agricultural buildings. Is there, will that need still be there, and is there a risk that there will now be a planning application to replace those the function of those agricultural buildings on adjacent land, with a, as a sort of continuous chain reaction? Then, if agricultural buildings get built and then converted to residential, and then you need more agricultural buildings again, is that something that could happen?
Martin.
So the land is considered equestrian rather than agricultural, so there is a difference there in terms of the way we're looking at it. And obviously that is considered as part of the planning application. However, what is more pressing at the moment for the council is the lack of a 5-year land supply, which is a significant shortfall in housing supply. So that obviously needs to be factored in as well. In terms of adjacent land uses, the planning application and the planning process can't sort of speculate on what may or may not happen adjacent to the site. Clearly, if anything unlawful appeared, we'd obviously investigate that, subject to it being reported. But we can't take that into consideration as part of the planning application, what may or may not happen on the adjacent land holdings.
Councillor Bramfield, did you have a follow-up?
I think that answers my question. It doesn't really resolve that fundamental issue, but as far as the planning requirements are concerned, I think that answers it.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
I've got one or two questions on this. First one is the people objecting refer to footnote 7. Is that the tilted balance footnote?
That's correct. So just being clear on the footnote 7 point. So I'm not saying that Greenbelt and the Chilterns National Landscape points don't apply to this site. What I'm saying is I don't believe there's strong reasons for refusal on those two grounds.
Right. Now the other thing, well, just looking down page to 9.75, say the site is regarded as borderline in italics in locational sustainability terms. So I was wondering how exactly you draw the line between something that is borderline acceptable and borderline unacceptable. What sort of criteria are you looking for?
So the MPPF makes the distinction between rural and urban sites and also significant and non-significant sites and the level of sustainable transport and the proximity for those different criterion. Ultimately, it is a subjective test. It boils down to appeals and officer opinion. I mean, what I did, I went to the site, I walked to the village, it took me 12.5 minutes. I could envisage myself walking there, taking my son to school, for example. So I thought, perhaps if I lived there, I would do some of my trips by foot into the village. I could walk my shopping, but it's not ideal in terms of all year round, and obviously if it gets muddy and different. So that's the way I considered it. I thought some of my trips I would take on foot if I lived there. They're not as good on the road. There's no pavements there. So that's why I considered it borderline sustainable.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I'm surprised that so much is being made of this public bridleway because it's going to be muddy, often be very dark. It's up a steep hill, and quite frankly, anybody who lives in that dwelling will want a car. I mean, they will inevitably go. Well, not inevitably, but they're highly likely to drive as far as Berkhamsted for their shopping. I'm sure there'll be Waitrose.
Question, Councillor Patterson.
Customers. So I'm a bit concerned about the emphasis on things like that. The only reason, if I did decide to approve it, it would only be because of the fact that we've only got a 1 year supply of housing. If we had 5 years of supply housing, this wouldn't get anywhere, would it?
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just following on from that, I think the reason why we're here and why it's a difficult decision is that we don't have enough housing supply and we've got a terribly outdated local plan. And you know, this council has to take responsibility for that, for not having one up to date, and it does mean that places like this are vulnerable. But yeah, we are looking at this on a balanced, and I think one of the speakers mentioned that one house is not really going to make a big difference to the overall housing supply. I think they've made some very good points on grey belt definition about whether this actually is grey belt. I mean, the actual legislation, as we know, isn't clear. But if we go back to what the intention was and the bullet points that the government or the Labour had said before they came into power, what it was intended for, this wouldn't count as it. I think we've talked about agricultural land, trying to protect that in previous meetings. And we've got the proximity to the Chiltern National Landscape. And I don't think this is a sustainable location. Again, I agree with the officer. It's to a certain extent it's not a. Sorry, lost my vocabulary. I tend to do that these days. But anyway, it's not it's not black and white. And so I think we were all facing a very difficult decision here on whether or not to approve it, and whether if we were to turn it down, the risk of it being overturned on appeal. So that's what I'm dealing with at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Symington.
Just turned it off. Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Hobson. I think this is obviously a very difficult decision. Some of my questions have been already asked and answered, but I've got a few others. The first one is there any significance to the fact that it's a self-build, which is something that you mentioned, and to what extent is it a self-build if it is already built as a building, and all we're talking about is cladding it and subdividing it? That's my first question. I am curious that there were no public comments made. I think that's surprising, but I can see the parish council obviously represents a considerable number of public comments, so I appreciate that perhaps that covers off that. You've already been asked what happens to the horses and ponies, and this is a site that I know, and the horses and ponies in the field adjacent to it live in the stables on the site. So if the site is separated from the field that the horses and ponies live in, I know you can't answer this question, but there is a question as to, what amenity is provided for them. And I think this has been alluded to, and I think you've said that you can't answer it, but it certainly is a question that we are, in providing housing for a family, we are leaving horses and ponies stableless or homeless, so to speak. I also have queries about the sustainability of the site, and I know that a planning application in Wigington was rejected on the basis that the family would not, or the people living in the property, were it to be changed from stables, so not dissimilar, would not be able to walk it safely into the village. And I also think, you can correct me on this, Martin, that some of the rules around that have changed, and highways have changed their opinion around some of that. So it'd be good to have some clarification on that. So there's a lot of questions here. I've only got two more. One is, it has been claimed this would set a precedent. Is that accurate? Is planning law set on precedent, or can you explain the extent to which a precedent would be set if this were approved as a planning application? And my last question is exactly what has changed since 2014? And I know lots of things have changed, but the things that are particularly relevant to your recommendation with regards to this application.
Thank you. Martin, did you go?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll work backwards if that's okay. So just firstly, in terms of what's changed, so the key thing, obviously we've got the grey belt. We've talked about grey belt quite a lot today, which is a new concept. Falling back from the grey belt, as I say, if the councillors don't agree that it's grey belt, there is then the previously developed land or the reuse of a building. But the previously developed land requirement in the MPPF essentially allows the redevelopment if there's no substantial impact, but it used to be no greater impact. So a greater impact might be 1 square metre added to a building. It might be the domestication of a site. Big change for me when I'm looking at no greater impact, because I think there's still that element of it becoming domesticated and there being potentially a trampoline going on there or some vehicles. I don't feel that is a substantial impact. It might be a slightly greater impact, but I feel that is now covers off the green belt point. And as I say, there were a couple of other elements that were provided in terms of the BAT survey and the LDA, the landscape document, that also went back on the other appeals. So further information has been provided and the policy context has changed. In terms of setting a precedent, I mean, we're in an uncertain time with the local plan and the 5-year land supply, and I have spoken to Alison actually about this previously, and I sort of said, in terms of housing appearing on the road there, on Nettleden Road, I mean, we're in the situation where we need housing, but we have a previously developed site and national policy has relaxed in terms of how that's assessed. I can't imagine any swathes of housing appearing anywhere in an open field along that piece of land. It just wouldn't happen. And particularly in terms of the local plan, if that is adopted in September, as we're predicting, or later in the year, and we start to get towards that 5-year land supply, it does give us a lot more comfort as a council to look at these situations and saying, well, if they're a bit more borderline, we can definitely say no to them. In terms of the highways and the sustainability point, so we talked about grey belt and there's that focus on sustainability, but there's also that previously developed land point that doesn't have such an emphasis. I mean, highways have said, similar to how I've concluded, that for one unit on a previously developed site, even though it's not in the most accessible location, it's not unacceptable specifically on highways terms. I think just in terms of going back to the self-build point, so the self-build, there will be certain criteria that's included in the legal agreement that requires the applicant to do certain things, whether it be them live there for a certain period of time or build it themselves or things like that. The implications on the planning application is that they aren't required to do biodiversity net gain if it's self-build. But as I say, that's the only real implication. We've obviously got it in the description and it'll be tied into the legal agreement. I think that was most of the questions. Apologies if I missed any.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Symington, do
Yeah,
you have any?
you've missed out about the homeless horses and ponies.
Okay, yeah. So I don't have information on where they would go. Obviously, if the applicant decided to provide a new facility somewhere, we'd have to look at that in planning terms. And if it was close to the site, we'd have to look at the Children's National Landscape and screening of that and all the same sort of things that we're looking at as part of this planning application. So it's something we'd have to assess as and when, but I can't say whether they are staying on site, whether the intention is to move them elsewhere.
Thank you. Councillor Madden.
Thank you. I agree that this is a difficult one, but for me, my thoughts are really that the government has changed the goalposts so much over the last year, 18 months, and put us under so much more pressure to approve planning applications. With this one, I have to say I do like the design of it. I like the fact that it's sympathetic to the current buildings that are there. It would certainly tidy the site up. And with regard to the sustainability and the highways and the discussion about whether people would walk from there or drive from there, I wouldn't mind betting that because it's a stable at the moment and it's used for equestrian, that cars drive in and out of there to use it. People who go to a stable to ride horses don't necessarily walk 5 miles to get there. They're likely to drive to their horses. So I'm not completely convinced that that would make me vote against it myself. So on balance, I think I would propose officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Before we'll park that for a second, are there any other comments, questions from the committee? If not, we'll move to the vote. Councillor Smith, right.
Sorry to prolong it. Yeah, I mean, I think we are in a very difficult situation, as other councillors have mentioned. It is a very difficult place, and this would normally be turned away immediately. Of course, people would use their cars. It's not sustainable. You can't walk your child to school in winter through mud. So it really isn't. And I am concerned about the horses, with no regard to where the horses again live. The self-build worries me slightly. Will they actually go ahead and build this, or will it be sold on? So altogether, it is a really difficult position. It is one house, and we are short of houses, but this is one house in a very special place that needs to be preserved. And it may not be agricultural, but it is very in keeping with that area. That stable is a well-known stable, and to see it gone would be it would affect the village. So I do feel very sad. And the fact it's been turned down twice, in 2004 and 2014, is just extraordinary that we would be looking at this again. I do appreciate things have changed dramatically, but this is one house. It's not we're not talking about 11 homes being squashed into a place. This is one home, and I think we should protect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith-Wright. Any other final points before we move to the vote? So, as a reminder, the officer recommendation is that the application be delegated with a view to approval, subject to the completion of a legal agreement and conditions set out in the report. I have a proposer for officer recommendation in Councillor Madden. Do I have a seconder for Councillor? I think Councillor Guest just got there first. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour of officer recommendation? Those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. The result of that vote is 5 members voted in favour of the decision, 4 members voted against, and abstention for myself. That means officer recommendation is therefore carried. Those in the public gallery or speakers, are more than welcome to make your own way out now. The next application on the agenda is item 5C and is for a change of use from one dwelling house operating within Class C3 to one residential care home operating within Class C2 at 1 Bramfield Place, Hemel, Hempstead. Do any members wish to declare an interest on this item? Registered speakers on this item, I have Sabah Paul Saidi and Laura Waterman and Ward Councillor Colette Whitelow. I will now hand over to the case officer, Elspeth Palmer, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been referred to the Development Management Committee, as it is the opinion of the Head of Development Management that the proposals are considered to be of significant public interest. Site location plan showing the site edged in red on the corner of Bramfield Place and Elstree Road. The site comprises a detached 2-storey 4-bedroom dwelling with parking to the front and a garden to the rear. The dwelling faces Elstree Road and has vehicular access off this road. An aerial view of the site and surrounding area. The site is located within a designated residential area of Hemel Hempstead, Woodall Farm, and is highlighted by the red marker towards the top middle of the photo. So just there, if you can see the cursor. A closer Google Earth photo showing the site, number 1 Bramfield Place, on the corner here. The site, yes, is on the corner of Bramfield Place and Elstree Road. And this is the parking to the front and the garden to the rear. A site plan showing the off-street parking provision to the front for 2 vehicles. This is a slide showing the existing and proposed ground floor plans of the 4-bedroom dwelling, showing the conversion of the existing garage, which does not comply with the standard size requirements, so cannot be considered a parking space when calculating on-site parking provision. And they're proposing to change it into storage and a staff office. The existing and proposed first floor plans showing the 3 resident bedrooms and staff bedroom being the smaller one. Several site photographs around the area. This is the front of the dwelling, showing the garage to be converted and the parking to the front. These photos were taken one evening around 7 p.m. to show how the on-street parking is when most residents are home. This photo looks towards the intersection of Bramfield Place and Elstree Road, with the site in the centre here. Street view from the west along Elstree Road, and the site is behind the for sale sign, so just there. A street view from the east along Elstree Road, and the site is behind the silver car on the left, so just in there. View down Bramfield Place, and the site is to the left behind the boarded fence. Further along Elstree Road to the west, you can see that there is still quite a few spaces on street for vehicles to park. And to conclude, this is a table showing the difference between the granted lawful development certificate on the site. The current proposal is only different in that they will allow older residents, 18 to 25, to live within the property and convert the garage to staff office and storage area. The conversion of the garage would be permitted development anyway. It's recommended that planning permission be granted subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elspeth. I'll now invite speakers to address the meeting. Saba and Laura, you have a combined 5 minutes. Do you want to check your microphones are working? You have a combined 5 minutes, but just as a reminder, neither of you are able to individually speak for 3 minutes. Time starts when you start speaking. Thank you.
We object to the use of 1 Bramfield Place being used as a care home for 6 to 25-year-olds. The committee is already aware that an application for a care home for 6 to 18-year-olds at the same site has already been granted, apparently without complaint. This proposed application for a care home for 6 to 25-year-olds, made on the same day, has garnered 40 objections from local residents. The increased age range is causing enormous concern among residents. The operational document that the applicant prepared, for example, is a bit misleading. It makes frequent mention of CLAs, i.e. children looked after, and conflates the definition of a CLA to include 18 to 25-year-olds. This is factually incorrect. As per the Children's Act 1989, child means a person under the age of 18. Furthermore, it indicates the applicant will apply for Ofsted registration immediately. However, Ofsted's remit stops once a child turns 18. There are exceptions for some young adults where extensions can happen, but only for a maximum term of 18 months and only if they are in the minority. If the operational document is to be believed, that the applicant is seeking to provide accommodation for children looked after, that it intends for Ofsted registration, then this planning application itself is completely superfluous. Planning has already been granted for the appropriate age. However, if the applicant does wish to provide young adults with accommodation, then they must do so properly in their planning application. They must address them correctly as young adults or care leavers or as adults with SEND or disabilities, they cannot reasonably suggest that a care leaver of 18 to 25 years old is identical to a child looked after. There must be at least some mention of supported living, transitionary care, or at least CQC registration, and measures such as family visits once every 2 to 6 weeks and restrictions on garden use also need to be reconsidered for this older age group. And the stated idea of encouraging care staff to take the bus and the bike to work is simply not practical for the needs of a young adult with care needs. I would suggest that they submit their application again, and if it is taken at face value, I'll pass over to my colleague Laura.
The impact on existing local residents and immediate neighbours with rights to continued amenity whilst living in the area are not being considered or addressed in the current plans or the previous plans application. Parking restrictions have been implemented in the immediate vicinity of the proposed site due to significant existing residential parking issues and road safety risks. These require enforcement regularly, and these risks will be further exacerbated by the addition of a minimum of another 7 vehicles to the site. There is only parking for 2 vehicles, so where are the proposed 5 other vehicles meant to go? This will have a very significant impact on residents, as you can see from the pictures already shown. There is no additional parking. You'll be lucky if you can find a space for 3 cars. There will be without doubt, an increase to the noise at the property. A care home operating from the premises will lead to an increase in comings and goings during the day, resulting in noise increase and disturbance, which is substantially more than the property was designed for, especially if residents aged 19 to 25 are allowed, in addition to already approved 6 to 18-year-olds. Younger children within the care home environment or small families are likely to create the same intensification of use and noise in external amenity areas. This will not be the case if in the evening and night, if an adult-orientated care home with a minimum of 7 adults there and the possibility of visitors and carers happens. Changeover of shifts due to proposed 24-hour shifts not being in line with government guidelines result in one potentially at 10:30 p.m, which will bring the noise of 7 cars coming and going, talking between co-workers and residents, and other noise from care workers in a neighbourhood that is very quiet at that time of the day, and this will result in movements above that of a normal family dwelling at a time of day when residents are trying to rest and relax in their properties. There is also significant perceived harm regarding how the existing local residents enjoy their amenity areas. External amenity areas in residential areas tend to have a general overlooking element. This situation would change that due to the occupants' comings and goings and potential short-term living arrangements, and therefore the frequency and turnover of new adult occupants would provide an increase to considerations such as overlooking or privacy that results in reduced enjoyment of the amenity areas of the neighbouring properties that existed when it was a C3 dwelling. All of these increases in noise and parking issues.
Next speaking, we have Ward Councillor Colette Whitelow. Councillor Whitelow, your 5 minutes will start when you begin speaking.
I should know how to operate this by now. Thank you, Chairman, and good evening to fellow councillors and officers. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that my 2 residents, Laura and Sarah, have so eloquently put and covered much of what I was going to say anyway. But I like to speak as a ward councillor, and I want to reflect on the confusion that has surrounded the planning process throughout in relation to this property. This is at least a 3rd application against strong objections from the local residents. And the application in this area was wrong for so many reasons. The area is a solidly residential area characterised by the inclusion of over 15 bungalows for predominantly older residents. A commercial enterprise is not what these homes and the surrounding residential area were built for. However, what safeguards are in place that the property will only be used for the purpose set out in the application? Within the past 2 to 3 years, a property in nearby Coleridge Crescent was also converted into accommodation supposedly for children's residential care. It has never been used for this purpose, due, we were told, because there was a lack of demand. When investigated, the tenants were either Airbnb or private lets to single people. In the event that this current application is approved, could we somehow put in the condition that it can only be used for the stated purpose, no other use to be allowed? There is intense parking pressure in the immediate area, as Laura has said, and I have to say, photograph taken was highly misleading because so many of the drives actually come out onto the road itself, which means that everybody has to be fairly respectful of the other residents' access to their properties. But there are so many issues caused by the parking and by the huge parking problem. And I speak as the Hertfordshire County Councillor for the area. I'm aware of many of the current road safety issues which are already of deep concern to the existing community. And there is no opportunity to expand any of the current parking facilities. Believe me, I have tried. I'd also like to leave you now with another heartfelt statement from a local resident which accurately reflects the concerns of over 40 of the 40 objectors. She writes, I want to state my objection to the change of use of a residential house to a 24-hour commercial establishment. Work and disruption has already started and concerns regarding insufficient and inconsiderate parking have been realised already. My concern is that from the beginning there was a lack of transparency. Residents received minimal information, no street notices and only a handful of properties notified, some of them unoccupied. Lack of clarity in response to queries were dismissive and evasive, and the whole process has been ambiguous, deceptive and unclear. The greatest of these is the planning application webpage, where 2 entries were displayed, but with slightly different council references. I think they're back to the original application, and I have 2 minutes, I think. To the layperson, this was to all intents and purposes considered to be the same application, and 40 applications were made. So why objections were made? So why were the 40 objections made not taken into account for both? The high number and ratio of staff needed for only 3 children at that time raised concerns. The application states and the agenda document reiterates that it will be only for three young people or up to 6 maximum. But there are references in a few places to the large bedroom being suitable as a double bedroom as well as rooms sizable enough to accommodate multiple occupants. What would prevent the usage of the house being exceeded? Your agenda report states there will be potentially less footfall and vehicular traffic than will be expected of a family residing in a 4-bedroom house. But this is nonsense, with the possibility of the residents and the staff, plus other regular visitors. I wish the committee to refuse this application, as the implications of this unsuitable change of use has the potential and has already radically affected the surrounding area. And I fully support all of those comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Whitelow. Members, over to you for any questions, comments. Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chair. In response to changing legislation, the County Council did bring in a 0 to 25 service for children and young people aged 0 to 25 with special education needs and disabilities, with the idea that young people weren't suddenly cut off and then put into adult services at 18. So, am I right in thinking about parking, that the children and young people aged 17 to 25 in this setting would have disabilities and be very unlikely to be driving themselves?
Thank you, Councillor Guest. Elspeth, do you want to answer that?
I did ask the agent that question, and he said based on the evidence from the other homes, it's very unlikely that these residents will own a car for a variety of reasons relating to their personal circumstances.
Thank you. Councillor Guest, do you have a follow-up at all?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Symington.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your presentation and your comments. I just wanted to be completely clear. We have a planning permission has been granted for this to be a residential care home, a residential home for children, 3 children between 6 and 18. And the only difference is that we will be changing that from 6 to 25. Is that correct?
Yes.
Elspeth, do you want to put your microphone on? Yeah.
The conversion of the garage, but that could be done under permitted development rights anyway. The lawful development. Yes, just with relation to the previous approval, it was a lawful development certificate, not a planning permission. And that is why there was no consultation.
Okay, so can you clarify whether that means that, is it being used for that purpose now? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the change of use can already take place for children between the ages of 6 and 18.
Okay, but it hasn't actually taken place. It's that they can do it, and they've.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I just trying to understand. So it's not that it's been granted planning permission, it's got lawful development rights, but it isn't actually being used. Those haven't been implemented. And then the applicants come back and asked to extend the age range and to do the garage.
My understanding is that it hasn't as yet been implemented, although they may have already started internal works.
Okay, but nobody's living there?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madden.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I'm just a bit concerned about something that Councillor White-Low said about one that's been previously approved locally that's not being used for the intended purpose. I would have thought that if there's something's been approved for that and it's not being used for that, then that should be being chased up, because if it's approved for a children's home and it's being used as an Airbnb, I wouldn't have thought that was lawful. But going on to my questions, I'd like to know, first of all, have children's services been consulted on the need for this?
Elspeth?
Or adult services? It's children's services, I think, it comes up to 25s now.
No, they haven't been consulted on the need for this. There wouldn't be a statutory consultee for this kind of application.
Right. I'm just confused about if it's a private application, have they identified, their clients must be surely the children's services at Hertfordshire County Council. That's what I would have expected, because they would be the ones that would be safeguarding the children. But following on from that, will the children if children are placed there, are they likely to be placed where there might be a 6 or a 7-year-old with, say, a 22-year-old?
That is potentially possible. In terms of controlling the actual use, in relation to some of the comments that have been made, I would like to say condition 4 and 5 actually state the maximum number of residents within the property shall not exceed 3 at any one time, and they shall each have a bedroom of their own. And condition number 5 also says that the use shall be restricted to that of a care home for young people between the ages of 6 to 25, and no other purpose within use class C2. So those two conditions do constrain what can take place.
Thank you. Councillor Madden.
I'd just like to come back on that then. I would have a great concern about this one, because you've got vulnerable children and vulnerable young adults who may not be related in the same property at the same time, each with a bedroom of their own. I would really be concerned about safeguarding, if I'm honest on that one.
I mean, that would take place no matter where they were, wouldn't it?
But we're being asked to approve, a different thing that's what's there at the moment, which is only children. I would never be happy to house unrelated, if it was a family where you've got, 3 siblings, where one might be 19 or 20, and then one's 17 and one's 13, But when you've got, unless it's very explicitly for connected families, I just think it's really concerning that this is a private venture that's not being, where the local authority hasn't even been asked about it, and you're going to be putting vulnerable adults and children in a place together. I'd rather they were separated, if I'm honest.
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you very much. I mean, whatever the true intention, and I don't have any concerns or disbelieve the residents that have spoken, but whatever the true intention of this, we have to make a decision on the application in front of us, and we have to take it as read, because that's what, if if it was turned down, that's what the planning inspector would look at, and not the what ifs. First question is, if they wanted to change it to residential again, so we're talking about use, if they just wanted to use it as a house, would they have to come back and say, we don't want to use it as a care home, we want to use it as a house? I'm just trying to understand what they need permission for. So if they didn't want to use it as a care home and they just said, okay, actually we're just going to still use it as a 3-bedroom house, do they need to come back and change the use again?
Yes, they would require planning permission for the change of use back.
Okay, so then that links on to whether they would, if they were going to use it for anything other than a care home, so for Airbnb or short-term lets, or because they wouldn't need to register it as a house of multiple occupation because it's under 5. But if they wanted to use it for anything other than a care home, they do need to come back. Okay, so we are just looking at this. So that and then if residents had concerns about that, then they would need to come to planning enforcement. And say the house is not being used, and planning enforcement would look into that because it's not in line with the planning. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get that up clear. I don't think I haven't heard anybody talk about the vulnerable, the looked after children and young adults in this. These were people that almost certainly will have come from very difficult backgrounds, and to be dumped at 18, I think, is one of the not great things that happens in our society. Most of us that have children that have become adults don't just kick them out at 18 and say, good luck at university or in your job or whatever. And I'm sure many of us are still paying and supporting our own offspring. This doesn't happen with looked after children. So I do understand a need there. I think Councillor Madden made some very good safeguarding points. At the same time, children are much more vulnerable in their own homes than they are with strangers. But that there was a whole load of other, and as uncomfortable as I feel about that, it's not part of the planning system, and it would have to be looked after by the people who manage and oversee care homes. But it is a valid point to make, but it's not, unfortunately, one that we consider in planning. I agree it's not a sustainable site. Most people will drive there. There will be additional cars. There's definitely parking pressure there. If the only case that would for really increased pressure, because the staff and things are going to be, they won't be there all of the time, but all of the staff won't be there all of the time, is if any of the young adults have cars and drive. But I think you made the point that they're likely to be vulnerable, possibly likely to not have lots of money and stuff, because they're making assumptions that I don't really know about. One shouldn't make assumptions, because let's hope that young adults who are coming out of care do have the opportunities and are able to thrive in life.
Hobson, can you make it to the point?
I can, but I think we are also allowed to make comments in this, because I think it's important that we're able to explain where we're getting to for our decisions, because this is a public meeting. It's not the same as council meeting where we only ask questions, but thank you. I will try not to go so long, but this is a very sensitive. I don't really take the point of increases in noise, because just because you've got adults there, there will be people with adults in the room. And I think most people will be inside their house, and most people will be doing handovers in the house, not outside the house. And again, if there is noise, there are ways of dealing with that through enforcement. And I think, and you've answered my question, because my other point was around change of use. So we are just looking at this for extension. Again, we have to look at what's in front of us, and I think on balance, given that it's already been approved, I'm happy to move officer's recommendation. Thank you.
We'll park that for the moment. Thank you, Councillor Hobson. Councillor Bromham.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we're talking about a kind of residential home with quite a few people in it. There was a couple of areas of concern which are worth going into. One was the staff changeover, and that would be noisy and so on. But it stays clearly in the planning that would be done on a 24-hour rota at 10:30 in the morning.
Sorry, could we not have interruptions from members of the public? I appreciate planning is emotive. But if you can... Sorry, we're through with the public participation now. Apologies. Councillor Burrow.
So according to the application, and presumably if they didn't comply with that, they would be in breach of their application. They're going to get a lot of attention, monthly meetings with Ofsted and so on. So it's not as if they're going to be, if they do start violating the planning requirements, there'll be a lot of scrutiny there. There's also been concerns about the quality of care. And again, we're talking about one-to-one staff to vulnerable person ratio, or even more, or during the day, even more, 4-to-3 ratio. So, and together with the Ofsted regular inspections, it seems to me that has got a very high level of control. If it starts going wrong, I'm sure that Ofsted would step in and rectify the situation, or relocate, close it down, or whatever, if it came to that. I mean, the obvious thing to me is the amount of space there is there for 7 people, and it seems to me it's going to be a bit crowded. But again, that presumably there are strict requirements for the floor area required for this kind of operation, and so I presume that's all compliant. And therefore, I can't see any. And actually, I think it is nice for people in that kind of situation to be in a quiet area with nice neighbours and all that kind of thing. I mean, I've lived in flats where there's been sort of 18 or 19-year-olds coming out of care, and I know they have a lot of difficulties being on their own, and they're probably not. This is probably a different kind of vulnerability, but to me, this seems like the sort of thing that we need to have, and I can't see any material objections to the planning application. So I would second it.
Thank you, Councillor Rowan. We'll park that for the moment. Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chair. The County Council does give support to care leavers, but from what I remember, putting them into a care home with 6-year-olds isn't one of them. Like Councillor Madden, I do have concerns about vulnerable young adults being put in a setting with primary school age children. But am I right in thinking this is not a planning matter as dealt with by registration by the likes of Ofsted and the CQC?
Elspeth, do you want to come in on? Sure.
Yes, it's not a material planning matter. And I think it is something that would need to be covered by another authority. I'm not sure which one. Ofsted, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Guest, do you have a...
Thank you. On that basis, because it is the only difference is the age range of the residents, other than the conversion of the garage, which could be done without a planning application anyway, then I can't see any planning reason to turn this down. But the CQC and Ofsted might have other ideas when it comes to the registration of the setting.
Thank you, Councillor Guest. Councillor Patterson.
I've only got one concern, but obviously that concern must have existed with the earlier application which was granted, and that is that the unfortunate staff member is going into a bedroom which is below the minimum size. Now, I was a bit surprised that that was considered acceptable, actually. Is there some sort of get-out clause for this?
None of the staff are considered as residents, so that bedroom would more be used for, I guess you call that catch-up naps, if they need them. They're not living in that property like the 3 residents, and their bedrooms are above the standards required for bedrooms. So did that answer your question?
So it's okay, is it, as far as you're concerned, because they're
Yes.
not residents?
The residents are the main focus, yes.
Thank you.
Any other members that wish to speak, or should we move to the vote? Right, we'll move to the vote in that case. Just as a reminder, officer recommendation is that planning permission be granted, subject to conditions listed in section 11 of the report. I have a proposer in Councillor Hobson and a seconder in Councillor Bromham. Could I have a show of hands, those in favour of officer recommendation? Those against? And abstentions? Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. The result of that is that 7 members voted in favour, 1 against, and 2 abstentions. Officer's recommendation is therefore carried. Those members, speakers and members in the gallery that were there for this item, more than welcome to leave at this point. The final planning application on the agenda is item 5D for full planning application for the demolition of existing buildings and structures and construction of 6 dwelling houses with associated access, parking and landscaping at 34 Bourne End, Hemel, Hempstead. Do any members wish to declare an interest in this item? Councillor Riddick.
Yes, Chair, thank you. My interest is such that this particular application falls within my ward, but I come to the meeting with an open mind.
Okay, noted. There are no registered speakers on this item, but I will now hand over to Case Officer Martin Stickley. I think this is you again, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This planning application relates to the land to the rear of 34 Bourne End Lane in Hemel, Hempstead. It involves the demolition of a number of B8 storage distribution buildings and the construction of 6 dwelling houses and the associated access, parking and landscaping. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, the application site is to the northwest of Bourne End Lane. To the south, 100 or 200 metres or so, there's the Bourne End Mills industrial estate, and there's other residential estates in the area. I think there's a fairly recent one built to the south. As you can see on the next slide, please, there's a number of existing buildings. There's a prior approval application last year confirming that 2 of the buildings that weren't storage and distribution now can be considered as so. So there are the buildings that are proposed for removal. Next slide, please. This is the access point from Bourne End Lane, so that's number 34 there. And the site location plan shows that it's sort of one large plot that's connected to this residential property. Next slide, please. And that's just turning and looking at the house. Next slide, please. And this is just on the other side, the other neighbour on the other side of the access point. Next slide, please. So this is moving down the street, and the access point is adjacent to that red car in the distance. Next slide, please. And then moving up the access drive, as you can see, the buildings on the right-hand side there, and there is some mature vegetation around the site. Next slide, please. And then just moving into the site and looking at some of the buildings. Some of them are in poor shape, falling down. These have been looked at in terms of bats and ecology, etc. No protected species were identified. Next slide, please. And then just turning around and looking at some other parts of the site. And then back towards the buildings on the northern element with that row of trees in the background. Next slide, please. These are the properties on Horseshoe Close, so they were the ones that are south of the site. This photo is slightly misleading. We're right on the site boundary. That sort of telephone pole there is actually outside of the boundary, so we're sort of standing in the hedgerow. And just to the left of this photo would be the southernmost property. In terms of the orientation, we'll see on the site plan, but the property is angled more to the left, so it's not facing these properties. And there are no clear glazing windows on the flank of the property. Next slide, please. This is the view looking down from the access track. The properties would be around this location, so the distances are much further down to the properties on Bourne End Lane. Next slide. And just moving down the access track. So the access track does have a fairly lengthy passing point, and the bins would be around this location within the distances for the refuse vehicle operatives. Next slide, please. This is a proposed site plan, so you can see it's 3 pairs of semi-detached units. There's 16 car parking spaces provided. That does fall 2 spaces short of the allocated spaces requirement. But as you can see, there are 3 parking spaces on the sort of right-hand side of the image that potentially would be visitor or unallocated spaces. All of the garden depths are 12 metres or so they're meeting that minimum requirement for family units. And as you can see, the access track leads down with the bin store closer to the road. Next slide, please. So just showing the proposed elevations, they're quite similar in form. There's 3 pairs. If you look at the next slide, there's a little bit of variation in the render that's being proposed on the middle pair. And on the last slide, back to brick again. We've requested a materials condition, so we should be able to get a look at the materials and hopefully choose a decent brick for these properties. Next slide, please. So looking at the floor area footprint, they're within the national space standards. They are all 4 beds with sort of boot rooms and sufficient storage spaces. Next slide, please. And just showing that the fire tender swept path analysis has been done. There's been no objections from the Highways Department. They were also reapproached by the planning officer because there are some other schemes in the area that have been allowed or in consideration. So the officer did go back and ask about that cumulative impact. Next slide, please. So just looking back at the site plan, the application site does fall short on the BNG requirement. Whilst they're making up for it in the linear habitat units, i.e. the hedgerows, they didn't have enough amenity space for other habitat enhancements, so they will be having to purchase credits off-site. There are a number of conditions in that regard. There's also sort of ecological mitigation, tree protection plans, and a construction management plan that's been requested by the Highways Department. Is there a next slide? That's the last one. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Members, over to you. Any questions or points for debate? Councillor Bromham.
Mainly observation. The standout thing here is the access. It seems like a terribly narrow road, but the 2 main constraints, the bin lorry is within 25 metres of sort of wheeling distance. Does mean the bin lorry will have to stop on that Bourne End Road. I don't know how much that will cause obstruction of the road during while they're having to wheel the bins all the way down there. And the other one was the fire access, which I understand is mitigated by having fire hydrants within the development. There will be other lorries that need to go there, removal lorries and things like that, which is a concern. But yeah, it is the sort of place where we need houses. It just seems a terrible shame they couldn't cooperate with the neighbouring plots and share that. There seems to be two tracks right next to each other with a hedge in between. I don't know why they couldn't get together and combine that. And anyhow, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you. I just wanted to, my only question really is just how many trees are going to be removed? Because when you look at Google Maps, there's lots of lovely trees there, and I don't like trees getting knocked down. So, just I know you said the biodiversity thing won't actually balance out. But yeah, just for the record, how many of those trees are going to be chopped down?
So there has been an arboricultural assessment provided. I believe there's only one category C tree that's being removed, so there's a lot on the boundaries. There are some hedgerows. What we're lacking is the tree protection plan. So there may be some requirements to cut back trees or potential for the hedgerow kind of near the access track to be trimmed back. But as far as the arboricultural impact assessment goes, there's just one category C tree being removed, which is being replaced. I would note that a lot of the trees are kind of Leylandii, so whilst obviously some removal of vegetation there isn't ideal, they aren't the highest quality trees in terms of sort of habitat and biodiversity net gain. So obviously the linear habitat pluses there are great, and the off-site credits will obviously contribute in that regard.
Yeah, thank you. It looks like there's more than one tree, but if they are Leyland, I take your point. Thank you. And the only other thing is, it's a comment, if I may, Chair, just that I think the parking for some 6 4-beds is very, very tight, and there isn't really an alternative because Bourne End Lane, from Google Maps, doesn't really look like that you can park on there. I guess it's not a very busy road, so you could possibly semi-block it. But you know, if they've got a family event or something, I just think, or even then with just 2 parking spaces per house for a 4-bedroom, and it does seem very cramped, but I'll wait to hear what other people think. But it's not, I do understand about this use of a site that's not being used. It's just an addition of a residential area and all that blah, blah, blah. But yeah, just a bit concerned about the parking and not so much the access. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobson. Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chair. And the proposed development would enhance the site compared with the dilapidated old buildings that are on it at the moment. Since the concept of grey belt was introduced in the latest iteration of the NPPF, we have seen land which falls within the grey belt definition, which I find it hard to see how that could be described as grey belt. Rolling green countryside, best and most versatile agricultural land. This isn't it. It's dilapidated old commercial buildings. So I'll propose the officer recommendation, which you might want to park at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Guest. We'll park that for the moment. Councillor Riddick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of points on this particular one. The actual proposal is gross overdevelopment on a very, very constricted site. It's within the green belt, and it's actually backland development with very severe access and servicing restrictions. The proposed dwelling parking is inadequate. 4-bedroom dwellings require a minimum of 3 parking spaces. Plot 1 has the correctly required 3 spaces. Plots 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 have only 2 spaces, which means the requirement is short by 5 spaces. That's a minimum. The proposed bin collection point is impractical. It is too far away from the proposed dwellings, halfway down that narrow track. And the access point in Bovingdon Lane makes it too difficult for our refuse vehicles to get up there. They couldn't get there. And residents wouldn't be willing to trot all the way down that little track in the middle of the winter to use the refuse bins. I can assure you of that. Originally, there was no swept path analysis, but the one being put up there now, but even that's not right. Because if you look at it, the proposed fire truck going up there would be right on the boundaries of both sides. He'd be scratching his paintwork on both sides of the truck. And he couldn't turn at the top. And other service vehicles couldn't turn there either. And the usual delivery vans coming and going up and down there, as they do everywhere now, would also be a problem. Bovingdon Lane is only a single track country lane. It does not have any pavements. There's parking on both sides of the road, and it is a local nightmare. The rear gardens are totally inadequate. They're far too short, and they do not provide adequate amenity space for the individual properties. They're only 11 metres from that fence. There is another factor which is not really mentioned actually, and that is there is another application pending right now, immediately next to that, at number 36, is that square bit there, for 4 units. Now, access there is going to only exacerbate what is already, we've seen the photographs, it's only narrow track. I think it's totally inappropriate where it is, and I certainly wouldn't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riddick. Councillor Patterson.
I'm concerned about the access road as well. Can we see the slide showing the access from the other end and down? That one, yeah. Now, am I right in thinking that the passing place is going to be sort of the bottom of the slide, that area?
So if we go to the next, so if you can see the back of the house there, and the bin store is almost directly adjacent to where the photograph is taken. So if we go on to the next, if we go on to the final slide, Elsbeth. So photographs taken around where the bin store is looking back towards the house, maybe slightly further up the access track. So the passing point is, sorry, can you go on to the last one again, the site plan? So, yeah, the photograph is taken around the bin store, maybe slightly further up. And the access, the passing point goes further up there for about sort of 15 metres or so.
So there's no need to acquire extra land for the passing place to be, is it all in the ownership of the applicant?
That's correct. So yeah, number 34 has all the land there going all the way around, and then
Makes it clearer, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, Councillor Riddick's raised a number of concerns which I'm not too worried about. The garden is clearly a minimum garden, but parking is also pretty minimal too. 4-bedroom dwellings. So there are concerns about that, but I know there was an allowed appeal in this area quite recently, the same kind of thing. But are there any differences between that allowed appeal and this? Because I know they're majoring on grey belt now, and we've got grey belt here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that I drew from that appeal, from reading the officer's report, was that Bourne End is considered a sort of sustainable village. Clearly, we talked about sustainability on the previous item. I mean, on this one, we have an inspector's decision on this road that says this is a sort of sustainable village location. And I guess that responds somewhat to the slight reduction in car parking. There's more options within a closer distance to get public transport and walk to local amenities.
Martin. Councillor Patterson, do you have a follow-up?
Is anybody else? I'll wait to see what anybody else says, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Madden.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned that Councillor Riddick came with an open mind and then once again had a list of reasons that he's going to refuse it. I think that we need to be a little bit more open and honest about these things. My only concern on this, and I really do only have one concern, is the lack of parking. For a 4-bed house, I don't know. We've approved planning applications around Decorum where we've not really quite had enough parking, and it's caused absolute nightmares. Other than that, I like the development very much. So I'm a little bit conflicted, but only because of the parking. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Are there any other points to it? Did you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just sort of come back, if that's okay. I mean, I understand the points about obviously putting six units here. So I've got 12-metre garden, so that does meet the standards. We've been talking about overdevelopment. The parking falls slightly short of what we'd expect, but I think in the context of having 6 units within a sustainable sort of village location that's quite far from other residents, there's not really any significant residential amenity concerns. I think on balance, whilst you might say the loss of or the reduction of 2 spaces might be a concern, I just don't feel that should this go to appeal, we'd have much legs to stand on, considering the argument on 5-year land supply. I mean, I've seen a lot of other developments where many properties are crammed in, and it falls down on garden size, it falls down on parking, it falls down on other things like proximity to neighbours, etc. But in this instance, I think most of the boxes are being ticked in terms of like policy compliance. So I'll just reiterate that, yeah, the recommendation is that this is an overdevelopment and it is a good use of previously developed land. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Any final points before we move to the vote? Not seeing any hands. Councillor Madden.
Sorry, can I just say then, I can't remember if anyone, I can't remember if anyone proposed officer recommendation. If they didn't, I'd like to, and if they did, I'll second it.
Okay. Councillor Smith-Wright.
Okay, I'll just make a quick point. I do think that the access is too narrow. Comes off Bourne End Lane, which is very tight, full of cars. So it's not ideal, and they're not amazingly environmental. There's no heat pumps. The biodiversity hasn't really been thought of. I would love to see a hedgehog tunnel in between each of the gardens for wildlife access. Hasn't been at the forefront of their minds when they've been developing this, which is a great shame, because as it is now, it's a nature haven. And as Councillor Hobson said, it's full of trees. So I do feel sad that this is being pushed through, but I do appreciate we need houses to be built. But I just wanted to make that point, that hopefully in the future we can ensure that these kind of developments really are more sustainable.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman.
Yeah, just to summarise, I think the parking there is not too bad. Because you could actually get a couple. If at number 6, if they don't mind parking serially, they could actually get a couple more cars in there, which I think would pretty much bring it up to the 3 per dwelling. Hopefully, they could manage with less in the long term. And yeah, so the main concern is the access road. So it meets the basic requirements of the bin lorry servicing and the fire access. There's a solution with the fire hydrants. That's a requirement. So it's up to the developer and the people who buy the homes then to decide whether they're satisfied with the access track, I think, and therefore I can't see any reason to oppose the application, and I will either propose it or second it. I can't remember what Jan said.
We've got a
Oh, right,
proposer,
okay.
Councillor Guest, and a seconder, and Councillor Madden. Any other final points for debate? Okay, if we move to the vote, as a reminder, the planning application, Office of Recommendation is that the application be delegated with a view to approval. I've got a proposer in Councillor Guest and a seconder in Councillor Madden. Can I have a show of hands, those in favour of Office of Recommendation? Those against? And any abstentions? So the result of that, of the vote is 8 members in favour of the decision, 1 member voting against, and an abstention from myself. So Office of Recommendation is therefore carried. That concludes all the planning applications on the agenda this evening. We'll now move to item 6 on the agenda, and I'll hand over to Philip for an update on appeals.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this appeals update covers the period from the 1st of March until the 5th of May. So I will quickly run through the report, draw out some key points. In terms of appeals lodged, 6.1, the total number of appeals being received this year is broadly similar to last year, which I think I've mentioned previously was less than previous years. So appeal numbers overall are lower than historically seen. This year we are seeing a significant number of appeals on minor planning applications. They're half of all appeals we've received this year. Moving to appeals dismissed, 6.2. The first couple related to appeals relating to front walls and gates. It's interesting there that the first one, the main conclusion of the inspector was a highway safety concern, in that whilst the gates were being opened, the car would be stationed on the highway, and that would be detrimental to the safe and efficient operation of the highway. Whereas the second dismissed appeal also related to a new front gate, but here the primary concern was the solid appearance of the gate, and therefore that was contrary to the established character, the open characteristics of that area. Moving on to the third dismissed appeal, members probably recall this application, land at Shefford Knoll Farm, Nash Mills. Members agreed with the officer conclusion or recommendation to refuse, and the appeal has been dismissed. The inspector agreed that the site wasn't grey belt due to the fact that it didn't meet purpose A, which is to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. So this development, the inspector called it like a finger pointing outwards, creating that sprawl beyond the urban built-up area of Hemel, Hempstead. And the inspector also raised quite a considerable number of concerns relating to design quality. So I think it's quite an interesting appeal decision to read at your leisure to look at different ways of assessing design and layout. And then just moving on to the 7th one on the list. Again, I thought this was an interesting appeal for members to read in terms of an assessment of how to consider parking pressures. The inspector does quite a succinct analysis of considerations relating to parking pressures. So, for example, this decision asks the questions, are parking issues resulting from this site, or are those problems already existing? It talks about the application of DBC parking standards, are additional bedrooms being proposed, and have accidents being identified locally. So these are all the types of considerations that members can take on board when considering parking and the potential impact on the surroundings. In addition to that, though, I would also add that the sustainability of a location and its proximity to services and facilities would also be an important consideration. Moving on to appeals allowed, there was only one appeal allowed in the period, and this related to the question about preserving character and appearance of Tring Conservation Area and the setting of a nearby listed building. So these are, I guess, areas of planning that are subjective and people can reach different views, and the inspector and this decision has reached a different view to officers. In terms of enforcement, one appeal has been lodged and 2 enforcement appeals were unfortunately allowed, both by the same inspector. The second one, I think, is the disappointing decision from an officer perspective. This is the land on Cupid Green Lane that's been subdivided and has changed in the last 5 years from a single field to multiple kind of small scale plots with buildings it was disappointing here that the inspector seemed to give weight to development that was unauthorized and also gave weight to agricultural development, which it's the original use of the land. It really, for me, that would be neutral in the balance. I think there's lessons learned from an officer perspective. I've spoken to the enforcement team. It's quite an old appeal. The enforcement officer is no longer at the council who wrote the appeal statement, but I think it was an interesting one to learn from an officer perspective in terms of creating a robust defence of enforcement notices and the type of evidence that is required to fully make our case. Moving on to the statistics. So the appeals allowed, I think, is the only thing I want to draw to members' attention. That's 33%. The national average is 31%. But I would add that there's been a couple of appeal decisions dismissed since this report was written, so we are bang on the national average now at 31%. In terms of upcoming hearings, inquiries, just to say that land east of Tring, that appeal has come through since the report was written. Officers did put forward to the planning inspector that it could be dealt with by way of a hearing, but the planning inspector have concluded that it needs to be a public inquiry due to the range of issues and the scale of interest. So that's, we don't yet have a start letter, but we anticipate that start letter will come imminently, which, if it does, then an inquiry, for example, could be kind of September time. And just to note on that regard, that officers have been preparing for this appeal, and as part of that, we're looking to run a Q&A session involving kind of legal support, a barrister, so a Q&A session with members, just to kind of run through the appeal process in terms of what would be, so yeah, just to kind of explain an overview of the process and just to explain the onus is to cooperate and act reasonably for a public inquiry as a council. It's a way of also kind of explaining to members how and when members could get involved in that public inquiry process. So I guess it's a briefing in that regard in what should and shouldn't be expected of members in terms of conduct and participation. So hopefully that will be a useful kind of Q&A session. And so I think the only other thing on the appeals report, so just to say in terms of that Q&A session that we're looking to run with members, that would be week commencing 22nd of June. And then in terms of costs, the final two items on the appeals report, there were no costs awarded against the council. One application for costs was refused. And I think it just demonstrates the importance of robust reasons for refusal, both as a whole, but also each individual reason for refusal must be defendable, kind of based on planning policy, material planning considerations, and the technical evidence that is provided. Otherwise, we are at risk of costs, and we are receiving applications for costs. The only other thing I wanted to mention is in respect of the designation letter. Members are aware that we have, as a council, exceeded the 10% threshold for the quality of decision making in respect of majors, which means that more than 10% of total majors determined in a period have ultimately been allowed on appeal. So we received the threat of designation letter from MHCLG, which I have responded to. According to my calculations, because it's a 2-year rolling cycle, obviously year one things fall away and we get the next year. I can already calculate that even if all majors currently that could be appealed are allowed on appeal, we would be below 10% in the next assessment period. So one of the arguments put forward to MHCLG is that this exceedance was a 1-year blip. And we've also detailed things like the changes to the Constitution and the member training processes that have taken place. So we await the outcome from MHCLG. There are 13 other local authorities in the same boat as Decorum. In my view, the Planning Inspectorate don't have the capacity to deal with 14 councils in special measures, because obviously that means the applicant can submit their applications directly to PINS. Yeah, so I will obviously update members as soon as we hear back. We are expecting a response before summer recess. That's simply the message we've been told. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philip. I will assume the report's noted unless any member wishes to raise any pressing matter relating to the report. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you. Just had a question on the majors. When the local plan comes into place, I'm guessing the other than sort of design and material planning things, we're more likely to say yes to those if they're in the place where we've designated them. So is the fact that we haven't got an up-to-date local plan, has that contributed to our majors issues there, do you think, a little bit? That was my first question. And will that risk go down even further when we have the local plan in place, which I think you said was this autumn?
Well, yes, I mean, in terms of, I guess, the principle of development, that will help answer those types of questions. But there's always considerations for officers and members, as you say, in terms of design, access, sustainability, and the whole raft of other considerations. And obviously the appeals allowed over the period also related to, for example, the two SANG sites. It wasn't just housing schemes. But yes, the principal aspect should fall away in terms of allocated housing sites.
And also ongoing training, as you mentioned. Thank you, that was a really good description. And the only other thing is I think we're just still struggle a little bit with the land east of Tring because it's in the local plan. So, but as you say, it can still be turned down on points of detail. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Just a quick one on Appeals Lodge 6.1, number 3. I was wondering what kind of application that was. It's the land between A4251 and A41 eastbound London Road Trip. We aren't placing them.
I can provide the details specifically in terms of I believe that was a minor planning application, but I can provide the exact details to you after the meeting.
Don't know right away. I'll look it up myself.
Thank you. The report is then noted, and that concludes the business of this evening's meeting. Thank you for your participation, and I now declare the meeting. Oh, Philip, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, just wanted to mention one further thing. Obviously, I guess the meeting's closed, but I just wanted to again update members in terms of the national scheme of delegation. Again, looking to have a member session to run through the regulations that are due to come into effect due to come into effect at the end of September is the current timescale. And so, yes, and there will be two categories. One category, for example, householders and minors would be automatically delegated, and then there would be a second category of applications that potentially would need to go through a gateway test in terms of their significance on various points. That gateway test would be decided by the chair of planning committee and either myself or Ross Weir as assistant director. And then if it passes through that gateway, then it would come to planning committee. So there are a number of nuances. I've very much simplified it, and I think it would be helpful to have a member session on the new processes, potentially depending on timescales, and obviously conscious of member time, if it's combined with the land east of Tring Q&A, but I may need to have that session a bit quicker, because if the regulations come into effect at the end of September, then obviously there's a whole series of constitutional member approval. So in terms of scrutiny, group leader, etc., going up to council. So there's a whole number of steps that would need to be programmed in ahead of the end of September. So I potentially would like to brief members relatively soon on the national scheme of delegation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philip. I can now declare the meeting concluded and wish you a good evening. Thank you.